So before I read our scripture today, I'm feeling a little emotional. This is the last month that I'll be preaching here, and today will be the last time I serve you communion. So we're going to have everybody come to one station today, and so this sermon series, if there is such a thing, is called The Final Four, and you can decide whether it's go big or go home or single elimination or all that kind of stuff. So I feel some pressure on it, but anyway. I hope to have a final four Sundays with you that are meaningful and help us bring to a close this chapter in our church's life. Of course, Linda will remain, and you will see me from time to time, but there will be some changing there as I move on to becoming a district superintendent in July. Our scripture passage is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3, verses 31 to 35. Then Jesus' mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you." And he replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." Last week, my parents were here, and so I did a sermon on honor your father and your mother, one that went down really well with them, I say. Very well received. So this week, my brother is here, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about siblings and how important siblings are in the Bible. Tim is 3 years younger than me, and we're pretty close. He's probably my closest friend. Not to say that we've always been really super close or great brothers. We've had our sibling stuff just like everybody else. When Tim was in the first or second grade, sometimes when the family would sit around, Tim would say, "Hey guys, do you remember when?" And then he would tell this long story about something he had remembered that we had all done. And then a lot of times when he was finished, I would pipe up and say, "Tim's always remembering things that never happened." And it really irritated him. But that is the job of the older brother, is to irritate and aggravate the younger brother. But we were pretty close always growing up. From elementary school days into a time that is probably where we were much older than I care to admit, Tim and I would frequently lie in bed beside each other, and we'd play episodes of this show we made up. And the stars of the show were the whale, the seal, the mouse. Tim, you want to flash a little mouse there? And we would lay side by side, and we had now these had nothing to do with the seagoing creatures or the rodents. I mean, it's just the names we came up with. And we would play episode after, and we thought of them as episodes. It had a theme song. It came on the same way every time. The whale, the seal, and the mouse had wives and children. There was a host of background characters that showed up on a consistent basis. We had recurring skits. And this went on for a long time. As I say, longer than I care to admit. And to this day, we remember episodes. We say, "Hey, do you remember the time when the whale and the seal went to," and we remember it. It was like Seinfeld before Seinfeld. And I think it was equally genius, if I may say. But we had such a great time, and I'll never forget one time, Tim was laughing so hard that he wet his pants. And he could tell it was coming, and he was both laughing and mad at me at the same time. He was laughing and then, "Don't make me laugh," and laughing and don't. And so then he got up and cleaned himself up, and then he got right back in next to me and was like, "Okay, where were we?" And so every once in a while, whenever I go to one of his gigs that he's playing somewhere during the show, if he looks out at me in the audience, I'll just give him a little. And he knows. Tim sang at our wedding. We like John Denver's classic Annie song, "You Fill Up My Senses." And so Tim was there to play for it, and I think he was supposed to come in right after we had exchanged vows. And he must have come in a little bit later than I was planning or thinking that he should have come in, because the photographer caught it perfectly. There's obviously a pause there where I'm thinking Tim's supposed to play, and he isn't playing yet, and so you see me look over at him with a look of consternation, and it's caught perfectly in a photograph. You know. So there was that. I was very honored to get to officiate at his wedding a few years ago, he and Glennis. And then honored but saddened to have to officiate at her memorial service after she passed away. So we've had a lot of laughter. We've also had lots of tears together. It's a very important relationship. Siblings. If you're lucky enough to have them, they're very important. Tim and I also do a pretty good Simon and Garfunkel impression. But I got to thinking about siblings and famous siblings in the Bible, because there are several. And I thought I would talk a little bit about some of those famous siblings. It doesn't get off to a good start with the very first set of siblings, which is Cain and Abel. And you may recall that things didn't work out too well in that. Cain was a farmer, settler, and Abel was a shepherd nomad. And they would bring their offerings to God, and Cain brought something that he had grown, and Abel would bring a lamb for the offering. And for some reason, we do not know why, God preferred Abel's offering to Cain's. And Cain, the older brother, was very angry that God seemed to prefer Abel, his younger brother's offering. And so in a few verses, we already come to the time where Cain slays his brother, Abel. Who knows what that story is about? Cain and Abel, those stories belong to the mythological portion of Genesis. They weren't real people, but they represented something that was important. Scholars think that in the story of Cain and Abel, what you are hearing is some tension between the early Israelite community over should we be farmer settlers or should we be nomadic shepherds, and that tension in the community is being told in this story of Cain and Abel as the Israelites try to figure out which one do they want to be, because the Israelites were proud of their nomadic shepherding history, but many of them also wanted to settle and farm. And it's kind of interesting that after Cain kills Abel, he is then forced to become a nomadic wanderer, like his brother had been. So that's an interesting set of siblings there in the Bible. I also think of Jacob and Esau, and it is always said that way, Jacob and Esau. It really should be Esau and Jacob. Esau, they're twins, but Esau is the older of the two. Esau is the older brother. Esau is rugged and handsome, like older brothers tend to be. And Jacob was kind of a trickster, kind of a sneaky person, like younger siblings tend to be. And Jacob fooled their father Isaac. Jacob and Esau were children of Isaac, grandsons of Abraham. He fooled their father Isaac so that Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau. Esau, as the older brother, should have received the family inheritance. He should have become the leader of the clan. But because of Jacob being tricksy and sneaky, he deceived their father, and Jacob received the blessing and the inheritance and became the leader of the clan. And after that, Esau was furious with his younger brother, and Jacob had to flee. And we're told many chapters later in Genesis, after many, many years, that they finally come back together and reunite in forgiveness and love. So that's a sibling relationship that started off kind of rough, but ends close. In the New Testament, some siblings that are famous are Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Lazarus, of course, is the one that Jesus raised from the dead. Martha and Mary are sisters. We get some stories about the two of them. We're not told, I don't think, which one is the oldest, but it just sounds like it's Martha to me. Martha is the one that when Jesus and the disciples come to the home, Martha is the one who's working in the kitchen, who's super responsible and making sure that things are done the way they're supposed to be done and everybody's needs are being taken care of. That just sounds like the responsible older sibling to me. Mary, on the other hand, is just kind of wanting to hang out with Jesus and the disciples and listen to them tell stories in the living room. Martha is the doer. Mary, the younger one, I think, is the beer, the free spirit. And you can kind of hear that even in the story that I shared last week of the two brothers, the older brother who stayed home and worked the land and was loyal to the father, while the younger brother went away, squandered his share of the inheritance in riotous living, and came back, and the father forgave the younger brother, and boy, it just really ticked off the older brother who had done everything right, and the younger brother was getting a party. Those stories, they're throughout the Bible, and the annoying fact about them is that it shows time and time again God seems to have a preference for the younger sibling. And it annoys me to no end. But it was there in Abel, it was there in Jacob. When Martha came to Jesus to complain that she was doing all the work and Mary was just sitting there listening to the stories, Jesus said, Mary is the one who understands what's important. So it is irritating that Jesus and God tend to prefer the carefree being attitude of the younger siblings over the ultra-responsible older brother. In our family, I became the preacher. Tim became the musician. Which one sounds cooler to you? We both get up in front of crowds, but that's about it. So it's there. You can kind of see it throughout these stories. The sibling relationship is very unique in the sense that if everything goes to plan, and of course many times life doesn't, but if everything goes to plan, your relationship with your siblings is the longest relationships of your life. Your parents raise you, and you live in relationship with them, or perhaps if you're lucky, the first 2/3 of your life, and then they pass away, and the last third of your life is spent without them. If you are fortunate enough to get married or to have a significant relationship with another person, that typically happens after the first third of your life is over and you're with them, hopefully, for the last 2/3 of your life. So you're only with them that portion as well. But siblings, if it all goes to plan, siblings are there from the earliest days all the way to the end. It's a very important and powerful relationship. And the interesting thing, as I thought about it, was that it is the sibling relationship that is held up most often in the Bible as the example or the model for how we are supposed to relate with other people in general. Our brothers and sisters. And that's the model or the metaphor that is used. And I thought about that. Why is that the case? What is it that's so amazing about the sibling relationship that it is the model for how we should be with everybody? And I thought, well, on the one hand, it's a fierce relationship. Siblings are fiercely protective. Ailey can sometimes say things about Will that aren't very nice. If somebody else says something about Will that isn't very nice, Ailey gets her hackles up. Siblings are very protective of each other. There's a loyalty. Siblings can also be competitive, and if it's kind of kept in check, it's a competitiveness that can help you become stronger. Tim and I had our own struggles with that, from big things to small things. The one that comes to my mind is when we used to get in the car as little kids in the back seat, we had a big struggle and argument over which one of us was going to get to sit in the middle, because that's where all the good air conditioning is. And that was before seatbelts, so we were never in our seatbelts. We were hogging the middle. And sibling relationships can be the most honest. I think sometimes we can hear things from a sibling that if somebody else said to us, that might just end the relationship. But the sibling can be very honest and very direct. because there is strength there, and at the end of the day, no matter what is going on between you, you are still siblings. And so maybe that is why that's what is lifted up. That's how we should treat one another as brothers and sisters. In our passage today, Jesus is teaching in a house, and his family comes, and they're worried about him, and they have good reason to be worried about him because he's starting to get himself into some trouble with the authorities, and they're not sure exactly what path he's going down, and they come, and they can't get to him, and they send word, would you please come out so we can talk to you, like a good family would when they're concerned. And Jesus says something seemingly very insensitive. He's like, who's my mother and my brothers and my sisters? Here they are in this house. It's whoever does the will of God. They are my brothers and sisters. And it really feels like Jesus has given the cold shoulder to his biological family. But what's interesting is that in this story, even as Jesus seems to kind of diminish the importance of the biological family, he then uses the biological family as a metaphor for how we should all be. So I don't think Jesus is necessarily trying to demean his biological siblings. I think he's just trying to say, you know, in truth, we're all brothers and sisters to each other, especially when we live according to the will of God. I remember when we were little, I was in the 4th grade and Tim was in the 1st grade. We were on a basketball team, a church team, and I was one of the older kids, so I got to play a lot. And I was one of the better players on the team. And Tim in the 1st grade, he hardly ever got to play. I was number 4, and Tim, you couldn't tell whether he was 00 or 88 because his jersey was tucked so far down into his pants that you didn't know. And I'll never forget one game. I had like 20 points. I mean, I was dominating, if I can say that here. Playing really well. And we had a big lead, and so Coach put Tim in the game. And it was very rare that he and I would be in the game at the same time. And I'll never forget it. It's etched in my memory. I'm dribbling down the court. The goal is right there. I think this is at Priceville Gym. The goal is right there. And I'm going, and I'm thinking, oh, here comes another bucket, you know. And I look down to my side, and as I look down to my side, I'm coming dribbling down the court, and I look to my side, and running along step for step with me is Tim. And in the split second, I decide to give him the ball. And he scores a layup. And it was one of those times when I was the one who was more powerful and had the ability, and I chose to use that to help him, who was not as powerful nor as able at that age. Many years later, he returned the favor. Tim is a musician. He's performed in front of, hundreds of times, and sometimes in front of big crowds. And I've mentioned before, he once shared the stage with Prince, and he's just done it a lot. He's a professional. Taught himself to play the guitar, the keyboard, the harmonica. He's really good. I'm an amateur. I like to write songs. I can't play an instrument. I just kind of create them in my head as best I can by pecking away on a piano. And Tim has a recording studio, and sometimes I would go back to Alabama, and Tim would help me convert my little amateurish attempts into something like a real song, because he had the ability and the power, and I had neither. And I'll never forget one occasion where Tim is sitting at the keyboard, and I have little note cards with chords written on them. And live in the moment as we're recording, I'm showing him the chords, and he's playing as he sees them. And he's like, C minor, E minor, A. He's just doing it on the fly. That's the time when he had the ability and the power, and he helped me. And isn't that what it means to live according to the will of God? To recognize our siblings, not just our biological, but our brothers and sisters everywhere, and to use what power and ability we have to help those who do not have it. Amen.